The stable keeper. The sun was just creeping over the horizon, painting the dusty plains of Willow Creek in shades of gold and amber. The air carried the sharp scent of hay and leather, mingling with the faint musk of horses stabled in the weathered barn at the edge of town. Inside, Tsehay kills. Twice moved with the steady rhythm of a man who knew his work better than his own heartbeat. His calloused hands spread fresh hay across the wooden floor, each motion deliberate, unhurried. The morning light slipped through the cracks in the barn walls, catching the dust that danced like tiny stars in the air. To anyone passing by, Tsehay was just a hired hand, a shadow in the background invisible to the fine folks of Willow Creek. But this town had made sure he knew his place. The barn doors creaked open, the sound sharp against the quiet. 3 men stepped inside their boots, heavy on the planks. Elijah Boone led the way, his polished boots clicking with the confidence of a man who owned half the town. Behind him came Calvin Reed, the saloon owner, his grin sharp as a blade, and Tom Haskell, a lanky store clerk who followed Boone like a dog on a leash. Tsehay didn't look up, but his shoulders tightened just a fraction. He knew their walk, their tone, the particular brand of cruelty they carried like a badge. "Well, look at this." Boone drawled, his voice thick with mock warmth. "Our faithful stable keeper hard at work before the roosters even crow." Calvin snorted, leaning against a post. "Faithful. More like he's got nowhere else to go. Ain't nobody in this town hiring his kind, right?" Tom chuckled, kicking at a pile of hay. "Clumsy me," he said, his voice dripping with false apology as the hay scattered across the floor. "Better clean that up, boy." The word boy hung in the air like a slap. Tsehay was 40 years old, with scars etched into his skin from battles these men couldn't imagine. But he kept his eyes on the hay, his hands moving steady as if their words were just wind passing through. He'd learned long ago that responding only sharpened their knives. Inside, though, something burned, not anger, but a quiet fire that had been smoldering for months. Boone stepped closer, his shadow falling over Tsehay. "You know, I've been thinking, maybe it's time we found someone more suited for this job. Someone who fits in with decent folks." Calvin smirked. "Someone who speaks proper English, maybe." "Ain't that right, Tsehay? You got anything to say for yourself?" Tsehay's hands paused for a heartbeat, then resumed. His silence was louder than any words he could have spoken. That's when Maggie Harper slipped into the barn, her apron dusted with flour from the general store. She was young, barely 28, with eyes that saw more than most in Willow Creek. She hesitated, glancing at Tsehay, then at the men. "Mr. Boone," she said softly, "shouldn't we let him get on with his work?" Boone turned his smile cold. "Maggie, darlin', this ain't your concern. Run along now." Maggie's lips tightened, but she didn't move. Instead, she set a small bundle, a piece of cornbread wrapped in cloth, on a nearby crate, her eyes meeting Tsehay's for a fleeting moment before she turned and left. Boone laughed, shaking his head. "Looks like you got yourself a fan stable boy. Too bad she's wasting her time." Calvin kicked over a bucket of grain, the golden kernels spilling across the floor like scattered coins. "Oops," he said, grinning. "Better get to it, Tsehay. We wouldn't want the horses going hungry." Tom snickered, but there was something uneasy in his eyes, like he sensed the air growing heavier. Tsehay finally looked up, his dark eyes locking onto Boone's. There was no anger in his gaze, no fear, just a depth that made Boone shift uncomfortably. For a moment, the barn felt too small, the air too thick. Boone cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "What's that look for? Cat got your tongue?" Calvin laughed, but it was forced brittle. "Maybe he don't speak our language. Maybe he's just—" The sound of hoofbeats cut him off, heavy, purposeful, like thunder rolling closer. All four men turned toward the barn doors as the rhythm grew louder, then stopped abruptly outside. Tsehay's posture changed, subtle but unmistakable. His shoulders squared, his grip on the pitchfork tightened, and a flicker of something anticipation maybe crossed his face. Boone frowned. Who in the hell rides like that at this hour? The barn doors swung open with a force that sent dust swirling. A man stepped into the light, his blue military uniform crisp despite the long ride. Silver insignia gleamed on his shoulders, and his bearing spoke of battles won, commands obeyed without question. Colonel James Whitaker had arrived in Willow Creek. His pale blue eyes scanned the barn, taking in the scattered grain, the sneering townsmen, and the man with the pitchfork. The silence stretched like a taut rope, heavy with unspoken weight. Boone stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "Colonel, welcome to Willow Creek. I'm Elijah Boone, and I speak for the decent folks here. I trust your journey wasn't too taxing." Whitaker's eyes didn't leave Tsehay. "Taxing?" He repeated, his voice low and deliberate. "No, Mr. Boone. The journey was exactly what I expected." Calvin, sensing an opportunity, jumped in. "Sir, if you're looking for a place to stay, we've got the finest rooms in town. Much better than this dusty barn," he gestured toward Tsehay, well with his kind. The temperature in the barn seemed to drop 10 degrees. Whitaker's jaw tightened, and when he turned to Calvin, the saloon owner took a step back. "His kind." Whitaker repeated, his voice sharp as a blade. Tom Haskell, trying to smooth things over, chimed in. "What Calvin means, sir, is we've got proper accommodations. Folks who fit in, not like this fella who barely speaks and can't even keep grain in a bucket." Tsehay's knuckles whitened on the pitchfork, but he said nothing. His eyes flicked between Whitaker and the townsmen, calculating, measuring. Whitaker walked slowly across the barn, his boots crunching on the spilled grain. Each step was deliberate, like a man approaching something sacred. The three townsmen watched, confusion growing as he ignored them completely and stopped in front of Tsehay. "Tell me, Mr. Boone," he said without turning, "how long has this man worked for your town?" Boone blinked, caught off guard. "A year, maybe more. Hard to keep track with his type. They come and go, don't they?" Whitaker's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Come and go." He turned to Tsehay, and in a move that made Calvin's jaw drop and Tom's eyes widen, he removed his hat and held it respectfully at his side. The barn fell silent, even the horses holding their breath. Sir Whitaker said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute respect. "It took longer than I hoped to find you. The trail went cold after Fort Laramie." Tsehay set down his pitchfork, the gesture deliberate, final. "James?" he said, his voice rich and steady, carrying an education that made Boone flinch. "I wondered when you'd show up." Boone's face went white. Calvin's mouth worked soundlessly. Tom stumbled back, knocking over another bucket. None of them could process what they'd just heard. A United States Army colonel, a man who commanded thousands, had just called the stable keeper sir. Whitaker's eyes softened, a rare moment of warmth. "We need you, sir. Apache raids along the southern territories. 3 settlements burned, families missing. The governor's screaming for military action, but you and I both know how that ends." Tsehay's expression didn't change, but his posture shifted, the weight of old responsibilities settling on his shoulders. "What's the situation?" James Whitaker stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Chief Standing Bear's nephew led a group of scouts here 3 months ago. They tried to buy grain supplies. They were turned away. Now the Cheyenne are done talking. They're gearing up for war." Boone found his voice, though it cracked. "Colonel, surely there's been a mistake. This man, he's just a stable hand. He cleans stalls, feeds horses." Whitaker turned, his eyes cold enough to freeze fire. "This man has cleaned up messes that would have cost this nation everything." "Calvin," his face green, stammered. "But he's Lakota. He don't speak proper, don't act like us." Tsehay's voice cut through like a knife. I speak 7 languages, Mr. Reed. I've negotiated treaties that stopped wars. I've sat with presidents and generals while you were pouring whiskey and spitting on the floor. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Tom sat down hard on a hay bale, his face ashen. Boone's hands trembled and Calvin looked like he might be sick. This couldn't be happening. The man they'd mocked, humiliated, treated like dirt, was someone important enough to command a colonel's respect. Who are you? Boone whispered, his voice barely audible. Tsehay's eyes met his ancient and wise beyond the cruelty of this small town. My name is Tsehay Kills Twice. I was chief scout for the United States Army. I've stopped 3 wars, saved countless lives, and earned the Congressional Medal of Honor for service beyond the call of duty. The silence was deafening. Whitaker stepped forward, his voice like cannon fire. Gentlemen, you've spent the morning humiliating one of the most decorated soldiers this country has ever known. A man who's risked his life more times than you've drawn breath. Tsehay reached into his shirt and pulled out a silver star hanging from a blue ribbon. The Congressional Medal of Honor gleamed in the morning light, a piece of captured sun. This, he said, holding it up, was for saving 200 soldiers from an Apache war party. I walked into their camp alone, spoke for 3 days without food or water, and convinced their chief to stand down. Boone's legs nearly gave out. You saved American soldiers. Tsehay's eyes didn't waver. I saved lives, Mr. Boone. I don't see color when my countrymen are dying. The irony wasn't lost on them. This man, treated as less than human, had risked everything for men who looked just like them. Whitaker checked his pocket watch, the sound sharp in the silence. Sir, we need to discuss the mission. Time's critical. But Tsehay wasn't done. He turned to Calvin. 3 months ago, you refused to sell grain to Cheyenne scouts. Called them names, told them to starve. Those scouts were trying to prevent what's happening now. They offered peace and you spat in their faces. Calvin backed against the barn wall, his voice a squeak. We didn't know they were scouts. We thought what Tsehay's voice was calm, but it carried steel. That they were just men asking for food with honest money, Boone stammered. We couldn't know. We ain't mind readers, Tsehay said. But you could have treated them like human beings. You could have listened instead of judging. You could have chosen to see people, not skin. Maggie, who'd been listening from the shadows, stepped forward. Her voice shook, but it was clear. They're right, Mr. Boone. We all knew better. We just chose not to see. Boone turned to her, his face a mix of shame and anger. Maggie, this ain't your place. She stood her ground. It's everyone's place to do what's right. Tsehay's right. We've been wrong, and it's cost us. Whitaker's voice cut through. The Cheyenne scouts you turned away, one was Chief Standing Bear's nephew. When you rejected them, they took it as proof that peace wasn't possible. Boone's world tilted. You mean because we wouldn't sell them grain they're fighting now, actions have consequences, Mr. Boone, Tsehay said. Every choice echoes, every cruelty sends ripples. Tsehay walked to the barn door, looking out at Willow Creek. The general store where Calvin refused service, the saloon where Tom mocked strangers, the bank where Boone turned away anyone who didn't look like him. You see that town, he said. Every building, every family exists because men like me bled to keep it safe. Whitaker stepped beside him. Sir, we need to focus on the mission. Tsehay's voice was firm. The mission starts here, James. These men need to understand what they've put at risk. He turned to Boone. As the so-called leader of this town, you're going to make a choice right now. The Cheyenne raids I'm being sent to stop, they're headed this way. 3 war parties, 40 warriors angry enough to burn everything to the ground. I can stop them. I can negotiate peace to keep your family safe. But I need something from you. Boone swallowed hard. What do you want? Respect, Tsehay said. Basic human dignity. The understanding that a man's worth isn't in his skin or his clothes. Calvin's voice was a whisper. And if we promise to do better, promises are words, Mr. Reed Tsehay said. I've heard plenty of words. Actions tell the truth. Whitaker checked his watch again. Sir, we need to leave within the hour. The Cheyenne won't wait. Boone stepped forward, desperate. Wait. What can we do? How do we make this right? Tsehay paused at the door, his silhouette framed against the morning light. Start by treating the next stranger like a human being, not a threat. Remember that the man you step on today might be the only one who can save you tomorrow. He placed his hat on his head with military precision. As for making this right with me, you can't. But you can make sure it never happens again. Tsehay turned to Whitaker. There's one more thing they need to know, James. Boone looked up, hope flickering. What is it? The night you refused me a meal at your restaurant, Mr. Boone, I was coming back from a mission. 6 days tracking down men who murdered a family outside Prescott. A mother, a father, 2 children. I brought their killers to justice. Boone's face crumpled. You were protecting us even after what we did. I wasn't protecting you, Tsehay said. I was protecting the idea that families should be safe, that children should grow up without fear. Calvin's voice broke. God Almighty, what have we done? You've learned, Tsehay said simply. Sometimes that's all any of us can do. Whitaker stepped forward. Sir, the horses are ready. We need to reach Cheyenne territory before it's too late. Tsehay nodded, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. He withdrew 3 silver coins and placed them on the wooden rail where he'd been spreading hay. My wages, he said. For the year I worked here, I never collected them. Tom stared at the coins, his voice shaking. We never paid you. We never even offered. I know Tsehay said no bitterness in his tone, but honest work deserves honest pay even when the employers forget their obligations. Boone's voice cracked. Keep the money. Please, it's the least we can do. I don't want your money, Mr. Boone, Tsehay said. I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that character isn't about skin or clothes. It's about what a man does when no one's watching and what he chooses when everything's at stake. Tsehay kills. Twice walked out of the barn, the morning sun climbing higher over Willow Creek. Colonel Whitaker followed mounting his horse as they prepared to ride toward Cheyenne territory. Behind them, 3 men stood frozen, staring at the silver coins gleaming like accusations in the light. The scattered grain still lay across the floor, but it looked different now, not a mess, but evidence of their own failures. Boone picked up one of the coins, his fingers trembling. It was warm from Tsehay's pocket, solid, honest. Everything he'd failed to be. What do we do now? Tom asked, his voice barely a whisper. For the first time, Boone had no answer, no plan, no scheme to twist the situation to his advantage. All he had was the weight of what they'd done and what it had cost. 2 weeks later, word reached Willow Creek that Tsehay Kills Twice had negotiated peace with Chief Standing Bear. No settlements burned, no families died, no children became orphans. The territorial governor called it a miracle, but the 3 men in the barn knew it was no miracle. It was the work of a man they'd tried to break, a man who chose to save lives despite their cruelty. The change in Willow Creek didn't happen overnight, but it happened. Boone started selling supplies to anyone with honest money, no questions asked. Calvin learned a few Cheyenne words, greeting scouts with respect instead of scorn. Maggie took a stand, speaking out for fairness at town meetings. They never saw Tsehay Kills Twice again. Some said he returned to his Lakota people. Others claimed he went east to advise the government. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was what he'd left behind. Years later, when strangers came to Willow Creek, men and women with different skin, different languages, different ways of seeing the world, they found something unexpected, A town that looked past appearances, that measured character, by actions that remembered every human carried depths worth respecting. The 3 silver coins sat on Boone's mantle, a daily reminder that power isn't about who you can step on, but who you choose to lift up. And sometimes the man you think has nothing to offer might be the only one who can save everything you hold dear.